When people talk about great movie trilogies, it's always the same names, the loud ones, the famous ones. But what if the best trilogies are the ones that slipped past you quietly? What if some of the most carefully crafted three-film runs ever made are hiding in plain sight? Halfway through this list, the pattern starts to click. By the end, you may realize you've been ignoring something truly special all along. Number 12, The Pusher Trilogy, 1996 to 2005. This trilogy doesn't shout, it stares at you and waits. The Pusher Trilogy is a raw, grounded look at a world that feels uncomfortably real. Director Nicholas Winding Refn didn't make these films to impress critics. He made them to observe people under pressure and then refuse to look away. The first film follows a small-time dealer whose bad decisions stack up fast. No flashy editing, no heroic escape, just consequences arriving one after another. What makes the trilogy special is how each film quietly changes perspective. The second movie shifts focus to a side character, turning someone once seen as background noise into the emotional center. The third film slows things down even more, following an older figure facing the weight of time, reputation, and regret. It's not about action, it's about erosion. These movies feel lived in. Conversations overlap. Scenes linger longer than expected. Silence does more work than dialogue. Refn treats the setting like a pressure cooker, not a stage. Nothing feels designed for comfort, and that's the point. The reason this trilogy is rarely discussed is simple. It doesn't chase applause. It doesn't explain itself. It assumes you're paying attention. If you are, it rewards you with something rare, a trilogy that grows quieter, heavier, and more human with every chapter. Number 11. The OSS 117 Trilogy, 2006 to 2021. This trilogy looks silly on the surface. That's the trick. The OSS 117 trilogy is a sharp, clever send-up of classic spy films, but it never feels lazy or random. Jean Dujardin plays the lead with absolute commitment, leaning into outdated confidence, questionable charm, and misplaced certainty. And that's exactly what makes it work. Each film drops this character into a different era-inspired setting. But the joke is never just the look or the costumes. The humor comes from watching an old mindset crash into a changing world. The films don't wink at the camera. They let the character dig his own hole, politely smile, and keep going. What's impressive is how consistent the trilogy is. The tone never breaks. The jokes are character-driven. The pacing is tight. And beneath the comedy, there's real craft in the filmmaking. Clean visuals, strong timing, careful structure. These films often get dismissed as lightweight fun, but that misses the point. They're precise, they're controlled, and they understand exactly what they're poking at. The trilogy becomes funnier when watched together, as patterns emerge and repetition turns into commentary. It's one of the smartest trilogies hiding behind a relaxed smile, and once it clicks, you wonder why more people aren't talking about it. Number 10. The Millennium Trilogy, 2009. Before the glossy remake, there was something colder and sharper. The original Millennium Trilogy tells its story without soft edges. These films don't rush. They don't over-explain. They trust the audience to follow along, even when things get uncomfortable or complex. The central character, Lisbeth Salander, is one of the most distinctive figures in modern cinema. Quiet, observant, unapologetically herself. What makes this trilogy special is how carefully it balances mystery and character. Each film builds on the last, not by escalating spectacle, but by deepening relationships and consequences. Information matters, choices matter, and time passes in ways that feel real. The trilogy was released close together, and that helps. You can feel the momentum. The cast remains consistent. The tone never drifts. There's a sense that the filmmakers knew exactly where this story was going from the start. These films were overshadowed by a bigger, louder version that came later, but the original trilogy remains more patient and more emotionally grounded. It's less interested in polish and more interested in truth. Taken together, these three films form a complete arc that feels earned. No shortcuts, no filler, just careful storytelling that respects its audience. Number 9. The Three Colors. Trilogy, 1993 to 1994. This trilogy doesn't ask for your attention, it assumes it. The Three Colors trilogy is built around mood, emotion, and connection, rather than plot twists or big moments. Each film explores a different emotional state, using color, music, and quiet performances to say what dialogue often can't. What's remarkable is how separate these films feel at first. Different characters, different stories, different tones. But as you move through the trilogy, subtle threads begin to appear. Faces reappear in the background. Events echo. Meaning builds slowly. Director Krzysztof Kieślowski trusted small moments. A glance, a pause, a choice that seems minor until later. These films reward patience. They ask you to sit with feeling instead of racing toward answers. The trilogy is often discussed in film circles, but rarely recommended in everyday conversations. That's a shame, because these movies aren't cold or distant. They're deeply human. They just speak softly. By the time the third film ends, you realize you've been watching something carefully assembled piece by piece. A trilogy that doesn't need volume to leave an impact. It just stays with you. Number 8. The Before Trilogy, 1990. 5 to 2013. This trilogy ages with you, whether you're ready or not. The Before Trilogy follows two people across nearly 2 decades, meeting only briefly at different stages of their lives. There's no dramatic hook, no sweeping plot, just conversation, timing, and chance. What makes these films extraordinary is their honesty. Each entry reflects the moment it was made. The first is full of curiosity and possibility. The second carries reflection and tension. The third, it brings weight, friction, and reality. Nothing is rushed. Nothing is forced. The actors grew alongside the characters. The dialogue feels lived in because it is. These movies trust conversation to carry everything, and somehow it does. When watched as a complete trilogy, the experience is quietly powerful. You're not watching a story unfold. You're watching time move. Expectations change, people change, and some things stay unresolved. This trilogy doesn't beg for attention. It waits for you to catch up, and when you do, it feels personal, like something you weren't supposed to notice, but did anyway. Number 7. The Unbreakable Trilogy, 2000 to 2019. This trilogy whispers while everything else shouts. The Unbreakable Trilogy plays the long game. The first film arrives quietly, almost pretending it isn't about anything unusual at all. It moves slowly, focusing on routine, doubt, and subtle discovery. That patience is exactly why it works. Instead of big moments, it gives you questions. Instead of spectacle, it gives you stillness. Years later, the second film reframes everything. Suddenly, what felt like a one-off becomes part of a larger design. The world expands, but the tone stays grounded. Characters don't announce who they are. They test themselves, they hesitate, they make mistakes. The final film ties the idea together in a way that surprised many people. It doesn't go where audiences expect. It doesn't celebrate power. It questions it. And that choice is why this trilogy is still misunderstood. Taken together, these films feel like a conversation about identity and belief. What do we accept about ourselves? What do we reject? And what happens when quiet conviction meets public attention? This trilogy isn't flashy. It's thoughtful. and watched as a complete story, it becomes clear how carefully it was planned from the beginning. Number 6. The Man with No Name Trilogy, 1964 to 1966. You've seen the last one. Most people stop there. The Man with No Name Trilogy didn't just change Western films. It rewrote how tension works on screen. Each movie builds on the last, not by repeating ideas, but by sharpening them. The first is simple and efficient. The second adds scale and complexity. The third becomes something close to myth. Clint Eastwood's character barely speaks, yet says everything through posture, timing, and silence. Director Sergio Leone understood the power of restraint. Scenes stretch longer than expected. Music arrives before action. The environment becomes part of the drama. What makes this trilogy special is its evolution. Leone grows more confident with each film. The pacing slows. The visuals become more ambitious. The emotional weight deepens. When viewed together, it's clear you're watching a filmmaker refine his voice in real time. Most people treat these films as isolated classics. They're better than that. They're a progression, a lesson in how repetition, when handled correctly, becomes mastery. This trilogy didn't just leave a mark, it set a standard that still hasn't been matched. Number 5. The Infernal Affairs Trilogy, 2002 to 2003. Before the remake, there was something colder and tighter. The Infernal Affairs trilogy is built on tension that never relaxes. The first film introduces a dangerous balancing act where identity becomes fragile and every decision carries weight. It moves fast, but never feels rushed. Every scene matters. The second film steps backward in time, adding context and complication. It shows how choices were shaped, not justified. The third film pushes forward, dealing with aftermath rather than closure. Together, the trilogy forms a complete emotional arc. What makes these films stand out is control. The performances are restrained. The direction is precise. Nothing is exaggerated. The pressure comes from silence, not noise. While the first film received attention due to its later adaptation, the full trilogy rarely gets discussed. That's unfortunate, because the later entries deepen the story in meaningful ways. They don't exist to repeat success. They exist to complete the idea. Watched together, this trilogy becomes less about plot and more about consequence. And that's what makes it linger long after it ends. Number 4. The Vengeance Trilogy, 2002 to 2005. These films are not connected by story, they're connected by feeling. The Vengeance Trilogy explores what happens when people chase resolution and discover it doesn't look the way they imagined. Each film tells a separate story, with different characters and settings. What ties them together is theme. The first film is raw and emotionally heavy. The second is unpredictable and carefully structured. The third is controlled, reflective, and almost meditative. Together, they form a progression from chaos to contemplation. Director Park Chan-wook doesn't rush these stories. He allows moments to stretch, even when they're uncomfortable. He trusts imagery and pacing to do the work. Dialogue is precise. Silence is intentional. These films challenge the viewer without pushing them away. They don't offer easy answers. They ask you to sit with outcomes instead of cheering for them. As a trilogy, this is one of the most complete thematic statements in modern cinema. It's rarely discussed as a whole, but when watched that way, its ambition becomes impossible to ignore. Number 3. The Cornetto Trilogy, 2004 to 2013. These movies are fun. Then you realize they're saying something. The Cornetto Trilogy looks like comedy on the surface, but underneath the jokes is a thoughtful look at growing up, holding on, and letting go. Each film tackles a different stage of adulthood, using humor as the delivery system. The first film deals with avoidance. The second explores responsibility. The third confronts nostalgia and change. While the settings differ, the emotional through line remains clear. What makes this trilogy special is how carefully it balances tone. The humor never undermines the heart. The action never overshadows character. Director Edgar Wright uses repetition and callbacks to reward attentive viewers. These films are often quoted and referenced, but rarely discussed as a complete trilogy with purpose. When viewed together, they feel intentional rather than coincidental. It's a trilogy that entertains first and reflects later, and that's why it stays with you longer than expected. Number 2. The APU Trilogy, 1955 to 1959. This trilogy doesn't rush your emotions, it earns them. The APU trilogy follows one life from childhood to adulthood with a level of patience that feels almost radical today. These films are quiet, observational, and deeply grounded in everyday moments. Nothing is exaggerated. Nothing is forced. Life simply unfolds, one step at a time. The first film introduces childhood through curiosity and wonder. The second reflects growth, ambition, and separation. The third confronts responsibility and maturity. Each chapter feels complete on its own, but together they form something rare, a full human journey. Director Satyajit Ray trusted simplicity, long walks, small rooms, natural light. These choices give the trilogy its power. You're not being told what to feel, you're discovering it alongside the character. What makes this trilogy overlooked is also what makes it timeless. It doesn't chase attention. It doesn't explain itself. It assumes you're willing to slow down and observe. When watched together, these films feel less like cinema and more like memory. And that quiet honesty is exactly why this trilogy deserves more conversation than it gets. Number 1. The Dollars Trilogy of Crime, 1962 to 1970. This trilogy turns silence into suspense. Often overshadowed by louder crime stories, the Dollars Trilogy of Crime is all about control. Directed by Jean-Pierre Melville, these films don't rush scenes or explain motives out loud. They observe behavior. They watch how people move, wait, and calculate. The tension comes from what is not said. The trilogy begins with Le Doulos, a film built around trust and misdirection. Conversations feel polite, but every pause matters. Then comes Le Samouraï, which strips storytelling down even further. The central figure is defined by routine, discipline, and isolation. Entire scenes unfold with almost no dialogue, yet nothing feels empty. The final film, Le Cercle Rouge, brings everything together. It widens the scope without losing focus. Characters cross paths, not by coincidence, but by consequence. Every action feels measured. Every delay feels intentional. What makes this trilogy remarkable is consistency. Melville treats crime not as excitement, but as process. Preparation matters. Timing matters. Mistakes linger. The visual style is clean and restrained, matching the emotional distance of the characters. These films influence generations of directors, yet the trilogy itself is rarely discussed as a complete work. Watched together, it feels like a masterclass in patience and precision. This is a trilogy that trusts stillness, and once you adjust to its rhythm, it becomes impossible to look away. So if you've ever felt like great trilogies are already spoken for, this list proves otherwise. Some of the most carefully crafted 3-film journeys don't arrive with noise. They arrive with confidence. If one of these surprised you, say which one deserves more attention. Share this with someone who loves discovering overlooked cinema, and subscribe for more deep cuts like this, because sometimes the best trilogies are the ones nobody warned you about.